This is Isaac from IlluminatiWatcher.com. Today we're going to cover something that has touched on many of the topics we've discussed in the past. This is a research project I put together called The Ancient Alien New Age Agenda, Steve Jobs, NASA Nazis, and Sci-Fi Programming. Learn how all of these things are connected and how the programming is setting up a stage for the transhumanistic future that the Illuminati desire to bring us into. First, let's take a look at the transhumanism movement and how it's tied to the New Age concepts. And these things are actually left-hand path ideas. What it is this idea of non-conformity, which we see has been pushed in the last 20 years. This is all Church of Satan doctrine. What it is, it's the idea that these are tools used to free us and give us independence from organized religion and the rules of society. Now, while some of these ideas are great in theory and all, the reality of it is the Illuminati seek to push us into a different form of religion, which is part of this New Age practice. And when we say New Age, we're actually talking about Old Age because they're ancient ideas of the occult. And we see aspects like meditation and even channeling of extraterrestrial spirits when we get into this type of thing. An example used to convey this kind of concept is when you take a look at Apple CEO Steve Jobs. He went through the path of the occult, as any good initiate would, where first they have their view of reality and authority destroyed, and it is then rebuilt according to the new belief system. In a book by Mukherjee and Khanna called The Tantric Way, we see it described as follows. The fundamental principle of the left-hand path is that spiritual progress cannot be achieved by falsely shunning our desires and passions, but by sublimating those very aspects which make one fall as a means of liberation. Now, this is exactly what I was talking about earlier. This is the aim of the Church of Satan, where its followers are told to practice the 7 deadly sins that Christians typically deny themselves of. Now, the overall aim is that the follower will become aware of the possibilities on this left-hand path journey. And within it, they'll find that they can conform the universe to their will, which makes them a modern-day magician. Steve Jobs and the Apple iPhone desired to connect everyone digitally, and they've changed the course of humanity. And all of these things are veiled language for the New World Order and the technology being used in the evolution of consciousness. Now, when they connect everyone, this is a major component of the agenda because they believe in a world-connected consciousness, and the digital technology will be important for that because it will connect all of us. Ultimately, this is part of the transhuman agenda where they can become gods on Earth. This is the concept of self-deification. The people are now the new gods. And we can assume that we're looking at occult ideas, since one of the beliefs in the occult mystery schools of such as Theosophy has the concept of the ascended master. Again, it's man enlightening and ascending into becoming a god himself. Now, the seed for Steve Jobs' inspiration was planted in 1973 when he and Daniel Kotke met and they talked about a book called Be Here Now, and they also got into Autobiography of a Yogi and other Hindu books. This was in the 1960s and 70s, part of the spiritual enlightenment and the age of Aquarius. So Jobs read another book called Cosmic Consciousness, and in it he spoke of the great leaders in the evolution of consciousness in humanity. So it seems that this book told Steve Jobs that he could be one of the many in the long line of people who've evolved people consciously, which is what we find from a lot of these occultists and quote-unquote Illuminati types. So Steve Jobs and Kotke traveled to India. They hooked up with a guru, and he claimed to be the manifested immortal spirit of an ancient avatar. And where have we seen that as well? We've seen that in X-Men Apocalypse. That's what the main character tells us his background is. So Jobs was initiated, given a spiritual name, and this was influenced through an extraterrestrial entity. And again, I've talked about these concepts in Sacrifice Magic Behind the Mic, where I talk about a lot of the pop artists and the rappers. They all have these alter egos, and I believe they are initiates into this occult system as well. Especially when you hear people channeling spirits, particularly Beyonce with Sasha Fierce, and the list goes on and on. There's a ton of them. So after the channel, this message is from the great avatar, Steve Jobs created Apple personal computers. Now what did this do? This revolutionized technology. And this led the way to the iPhone, and that's the one that actually transformed everything, which is what we'd expect from the practitioner of the alchemical process of transmutation and enlightenment in the evolution of consciousness.
Steve Jobs and his team of engineers at Apple harnessed technology that connected society digitally and put all the world's knowledge, literally, at mankind's fingertips. But the seeds of this technological revolution were planted in 1973, when the 19-year-old college student dropped out of school. Jobs was attending Reed College in Portland, Oregon, when he, along with one of Apple's first employees, Daniel Kotke, made a decision that would change not only the course of their lives, but ultimately the course of humanity.
I met Steve at Reed College the first month, but our friendship developed because a week or two later, I must have been walking around with a copy of Be Here Now, and I was eager to talk about it. And Steve was familiar with it. That book quickly led to Autobiography of a Yogi, and then led to Ramakrishna and his disciples.
Like many of his generation, Jobs became caught up in the spiritual enlightenment movement that was sweeping through America in the 1970s. And according to those who knew him best, he considered it not just a passing interest, but a calling.
Steve got a hold of the book Cosmic Consciousness. That's probably what pushed him over the edge. He had chapters about great geniuses through history and how they were enlightened, and that was his whole thesis. That's how he ended up in India.
Fueled by his desire to find spiritual enlightenment, Steve Jobs traveled to India, with Daniel following a few months later. Together, they discovered a Hindu guru known as Haidakhan Baba.
He was discovered at about the age of 18 doing yoga in a cave. But there are legends going back that the same figure had appeared all the way back into the 1800s.
Haidakhan Baba claimed that he had no mother or father. But who was this character who had no known history before the age of 18 and was said to have manifested out of thin air? He professed that he was an immortal being, known in Hinduism as Mahavatar Babaji.
A Maha-avatar means the great avatar, the great incarnated being. Maha-avatar is eternal, and he can appear anytime, anywhere, taking forms of another human being. So he was here to change the humanity in a better path, in a path of understanding, path of greatness.
Steve Jobs did spend some time with them. Haidakhan Baba actually gave him an initiation by giving him a spiritual name. This is a traditional kind of initiation. So they were formally initiated by this guru.
Babaji had said that he was a celestial being who had come to Earth to help enlighten our planet and to advance us forward. And we have to wonder, is it possible that Stephen Jobs was being influenced telepathically by an extraterrestrial entity named Babaji?
Haidakhan Baba claimed that he had come to guide humanity to a higher path and referred to himself as the messenger of the revolution. Shortly after returning to the United States, Steve Jobs embarked on a revolution himself, the development of the microcomputer, along with Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak.
Steve was not in it for money. He was in it for the mission of transforming the world. The Apple II was the first mass market personal computer. Woz, of course, was the all-around genius who created the whole design and all the software. But the thing that Steve gets huge credit for is having enough passion for what he saw the future bringing that he just did not give up. And the iPhone, of course, is the computer now that has taken over all our lives. Transformed everything, everything.
So Steve Jobs, he meditated his entire life, oftentimes going to California's Tasajara Zen Mountain Center. And this is where he claimed he connected to these higher divine forces, which I'm claiming are extraterrestrial in nature. And they gave him guidance through channeling, which is just like many of these occult leaders we see in the history of mankind. And this is precisely what Steve Jobs read he was born to do in the book Cosmic Consciousness. Now this is where Steve Jobs was inspired to create a lot of the products we know of with iPhones and such, with the Zen-like interfaces. But you'll also notice the Apple logo. It has the apple with the bite taken out of it. Now this could be the idea of Promethean knowledge, where the serpent gave Adam and Eve the knowledge, and he enlightened them. Now this is the same idea that Steve Jobs was enlightened and bestowed knowledge from his Prometheus character, his spirit, his extraterrestrial channel. Now the serpent and the Prometheus, they are the entity responsible for evolving consciousness. Former Apple executive Jean-Louis Gassi called the Apple logo the symbol of lust and knowledge. And that's precisely what we can expect from this, with the extraterrestrial spirit, this entity, this fallen angel, being the one that inspired Steve Jobs to create these instruments we commonly use today.
Steve Jobs continued to practice meditation throughout the rest of his life, often finding refuge at Tasajara Zen Mountain Center in California's Los Padres National Forest. It was here, while deep in meditation, that Jobs thought he received much of the inspiration that transformed the modern world.
Meditation does help to connect with the higher source, a higher force, because then one becomes one with the divine. So they could, in a sense, download the knowledge, wisdom directly from them.
Is it possible that Steve Jobs received guidance from an otherworldly source? And if so, could it be that he was just one of a number of key visionaries who were chosen by extraterrestrials to lead humanity into the future, as ancient astronaut theorists suggest?
Television programming, it's in the word right there, programming, and science fiction tales, they've influenced and shaped the actual way that mankind has pursued technology and science. Communication systems and ideas about traveling through space were given to us years before it was a reality by various authors, including Arthur C. Clarke. Now this is part of the predictive programming concept. Now Arthur C. Clarke, he was the author who wrote Kubrick's the book that would become Kubrick's film 2001: A Space Odyssey. And this whole story is about mankind's venture into the cosmos an eventual alchemical transformation and enlightenment. And when do they do it? It's when they make contact with the black cube of Saturn. This is all alchemical occult symbolism. Now, these science fiction tales were channeled from extraterrestrial sources, as Ancient Aliens posits, and they perhaps were even planted there from these alien entities in order to help push mankind out into space and pursue contact with them. And we see this with the goals of NASA and SETI and the like, so this isn't so far-fetched. We've seen it happen in the past, so it's not unbelievable to think that it's happening again today. It's this idea of contact with entities and divine inspiration from otherworldly entities like fallen angels and the like. And these have been given credit for the various evolution of mankind and the guiding lights. Again, we're talking about the tale of Prometheus, when he gave mankind fire that he stole from the gods. He stole it from Zeus and gave it to mankind. Now, this is why all the occultists, they secretly admire Lucifer and Prometheus. It's because they believe he's here trying to help us. They think he's the misunderstood fallen angel. And that's precisely why Ancient Aliens is given to us by Prometheus Entertainment. We also find out that the ancient astronaut theorists believe in Hindu gods and goddesses, which were actually aliens, and how they intervened in helping with technological breakthroughs. And they cite mathematical formulas and mathematicians like Srinivasa Ramanujan. I probably just butchered that name, but anyways, he was a guy who practiced meditation and Hinduism just as Steve Jobs did.
Thing that he experiences has to do with Hindu gods and goddesses. But is it possible that it was really some kind of extraterrestrial who was helping him develop these mathematical theorems?
There is abundant evidence of extraterrestrial intervention that is involved in many of the most significant technological breakthroughs that we see in our world. And these could come through the form of dreams or actual contacts with some sort of intelligent beings.
Could Srinivasa Ramanujan, who practiced meditation and studied Hinduism, much like Steve Jobs, have received guidance from otherworldly beings that have been directing the course of humanity for thousands of years?
And the reason for this is the leaders of the occult want to surround us with these ideas and beliefs, and they want us to desire to possess these abilities. This will lead us into the transhumanism concept, where we want to supplant our bodies with further advanced pieces of technology so that we can become like these fantasy superheroes and become the Superman. Now, as far as evolution goes, we're led to believe that aliens are further evolved, and they already possess a lot of these supernatural abilities, and we should desire to make contact with them in order to learn from them.
It's particularly interesting how some of these visionaries think differently. So you have to wonder if these people are tapping into some kind of universal mind, and even that somehow telepathically extraterrestrials are giving them information so that they can see these universal truths.
Werner von Braun was one of the former German Nazi scientists that came to the U.S. during Operation Paperclip. And many of you already know that German Nazis had huge interest in the UFOs and the occult, especially because they were in contact with the Vril Society. And what they did is they used female mediums like Maria Orsic to channel extraterrestrial entities in an attempt to learn from them. And they sought to learn the technology necessary in order to create UFOs of their own. And perhaps they were successful. That might be why a lot of the World War II pilots saw these, what they call the Foo Fighters. in the sky. They were like flying discs. So we find out that Wernher von Braun followed a guy called Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, the man who was actually the originator of the ancient astronaut theory. And he wrote about it in a book called The Will of the Universe, The Unknown Intelligence. Anytime I see that word, the will, I'm automatically cued in on occult belief systems. Like, Adolf Hitler had the triumph of the will. We see this play out in a lot of things. Anyways, in the book, he details about this theory of the universe and a cosmic consciousness that seeks to guide all of us and pushes us out into space. And again, we're talking about how there's this one consciousness, how we're all connected. We see this in New Age, Buddhism, Theosophy, and now in the ancient astronaut theory.
Of Russia had some kind of advanced knowledge? Could they have been communicating with some form of advanced extraterrestrial intelligence that was influencing the space race and influencing this push to get humanity to go back to the stars?
Wernher von Braun was utterly captivated by the idea that we belong in the stars. It's as if the Earth is a seed, and if that seed never germinates, then it could just die. We need to go out into space, and that vision of a new tomorrow is what fueled him to want to succeed even further. That leads me to suggest the possibility that some sort of extraterrestrial contact might have happened with Wernher von Braun. Something or someone might have reached him and saw where we needed to go as a civilization and gave him the tools and the insights that he needed to be able to build our way out into space.
Tsiolkovsky and others like Braun believed that they were bestowed knowledge from ETs. And the reason for this is because the extraterrestrials want us to go back to the stars, back to the cosmos. They want us to make contact. But I posit that these are actually just fallen angels and demons trying to lure us into a new world. Now, we see this in the film Interstellar, which is the same ideas. Making contact with the ET intelligence is our path to freedom and, how we will continue to live as a species. The Arthur C. Clarke, he wrote a book called Childhood's End as well. And this was recreated recently on Sci-Fi on a television series. And this shows us extraterrestrial intelligence giving mankind a golden age where there's no wars, no famine. And we find out that these aliens are actually demonic entities. Later on, we also find out there's a Rosemary's Baby, or perhaps what they call a moon child, conceived from demonic aliens. But this gave them the sudden supernatural abilities to levitate, communicate with ESP and telekinesis. Again, it's the same concepts we've seen in the past. We've seen interest into these things such as from Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons.